And I'm talking about African slaves who tried to preserve their dignity, but after those 50,000 voyages bringing them into the New World, had to view America as absurd and had to view America as Egypt, even as it told lies about itself as being a promised land. That is Socratic, willing to raise questions of dogma. And the question is, how do we bring together these dogmas of male supremacy, dogmas of white supremacy, dogmas of homophobia, dogmas of somehow abled being more human than disabled, and dogmas of free market fundamentalism and aggressive militarism and escalating authoritarianism? We got a whole lot of dialogue to engage in, and the dialogue is not simply chit-chat, because there are millions of Americans across the world, here especially across the world, raising issues about these dogmas. The ecological crisis. How do we coalesce in such a way that we find something that's common that brings us together so that we're not at each other's throats? And in this particular text, I argue that the democratic ideal that is rooted in the concern about the equal value of each and every one of us. Because there's no doubt in my mind, as Socrates says in line 38a of Plato's Apology, unexamined life is not worth. And the Greek actually says the unexamined life is not a life for the human. And our English word human derives from the Latin, which means humando, burying. That in the end, we are featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creatures born between urine and feces, who often bury our dead like Antigone wanted to do for her brother. Why? To ascribe some significance in the face of the extinction of our bodies, all of our bodies, one day being the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. Now, there's a common humanity there. No matter your sexual orientation, your color, your hue, your culture, your language, whatever. And it's no accident that people of African descent in the democratic experiment, though we have no monopoly on it, we have a disproportionate influence on keeping track of that common humanity. George Clinton said we all emerge from the funk. He got that from James Brown. And it's very interesting. Fun, F-U-N, was coined in America. Some people say in California, but I don't know whether that's true or not. Black folk put a K to the fun. And the funk is just not a music of exotic stimulation. It's keeping track of a night side, of an underside, of a human side that has been rendered invisible. And the Socratic questioning of the various dogmas, because each one of those dogmas constitute a practice that loses sight of the humanity of other people. Some slice of humanity is actually treated as if they are less than human or less better than some other group, no matter what particular group that is, you see. And we're at a moment now, such a bleak moment, such a crucial moment, such a propitious moment, that if we cannot unleash democratic energies, beginning with Socratic questioning, we're going to slide down a slippery slope to militaristic, authoritarian, maybe even crypto-fascist practices. It's that real. Is that real? And so in this text, I begin with the Greek invention of Socratic questioning, hearkening back, of course, with these Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, and African backdrops. But Socratic questioning, it's not a plaything. Most of us would rather not engage in wholesale Socratic questioning. Many of us are one-issue people. Talk about class, they all fired up. Talk about gender, get silent. Talk about race, ready to fight. Talk about homophobia, get silent. Talk about elections, ready to fight. Talk about ecological crisis, get silent. Can we be morally consistent across the board? It's a crucial challenge. All of us will fall short, I believe. We're human beings. That's the humic, the humando, the earthboundness, the humility, the humanity that characterize who and what we are. No one of us perfect, but striving endlessly, ceaselessly, courageously to be better. Now, one of the fascinating things in talking about democracy matters and beginning with Socrates is acknowledging that Socrates himself, who never wrote a word, is never rendered as shedding a tear or ever crying. And this is a fascinating question. Not just scholars and intellectuals. I think it has much to do, indeed, with any serious talk about democracy. Because even given the profound commitment to mustering the courage to think critically for oneself. You think it's back on again? How's that? There we go. You don't think it's anything in the grass, though, huh? All right. Yeah, you just never know. Maybe I talked about the worms and they got a little revolt going on here. My point is this, though. That you can't talk about democracy without wedding Socratic questioning to prophetic witness. And the text spends time talking about what I call the Greek invention of the prophetic. One finds in Hebrew scripture. And this is very important because right now we have a debate going on in American religious life where for the first time in the history of the American empire, organized religious folk, especially organized Christians, are part and parcel of a very powerful conservative/reactionary bloc. And many fellow citizens really believe that to be religious, and more particularly to be Christian, is therefore to lean to the right. I hear more and more people even talking about George Bush might be bad, but he's a Christian, and I'm a Christian, so I'm going to vote for him. No, we don't need that kind of thing, no, but just say you're upset. That's all. I appreciate that. And so when we talk about democracy, we have to intervene and demystify these Constantinian religious folk who defer to empire, materialistic, hedonistic, conformist, willing in fact to adjust uncritically to the status quo, versus prophetic folk, be they prophetic Christians, prophetic Muslims, prophetic Jews, prophetic Buddhists, or whatever. And one cannot talk about the prophetic without talking about the Jewish invention of the prophetic unleashed in the Hebrew scriptures, in which the definition of being human is defined as being kind to the stranger, being in solidarity with those who cry and shed tears. And this is a radical distinction between the Socratic and the prophetic, that Socrates argues, but he never cries. Whereas the Hebrew scripture begins with the cries of a hated, oppressed people who are subjugated, who then constitute a covenant with a higher power. And that covenant tells them that if you are to be who you ought to be, you better learn how to pursue justice. You better learn how to treat the stranger and the widow with mercy and kindness. Proverbs 14:31. He or she who insults the poor insults one's maker. He or she who is in solidarity with the poor elevates one's maker. Whether you ascribe the cognitive commitments to God or not, that's not even the question at this point. It's a matter of philosophical anthropology. It's a matter of what it means to be human. And you can still believe to be human is to be fundamentally concerned with doing justice and walking humbly.